Welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. I'm Maureen, your host, and this week we have a really special surprise for you. We are interviewing Paula Byrne. She is an author, and she was actually the literary script supervisor for Sanditon, or actually I guess it was a literary advisor for Sanditon. She has written several books on Jane Austen. I actually just ordered a new one the other day, and I will put the links to those books down below. We had talked about some of her books earlier in an earlier episode. I believe it was episode 2, Character Spotlight on Jane Austen. I had given you a link for her book then, and so I will do that again. I'll put all the links to her books below. She is a wealth of knowledge, and she was a delightful person to talk to, and in honor of, I don't know if you follow her on Twitter, but you can find her, Paula Byrne Author, on Twitter. She's very active on there, and she talks about Sanditon a lot. I believe it was her, I had to ask questions about this, but I believe it was her who started the Wear Red for Sanditon campaign. And so I am wearing my red lipstick. Before it was Wear Red, and I think I got a message from Liana, who did these pictures back here, telling me she was waiting for my red lipstick picture. And then I looked it up, and Paula had started a red lipstick for Sanditon sort of campaign. It was more of a show me your pictures of you wearing red lipstick for Sanditon sort of thing, just to get the fan base involved. And she's really good at doing that, and she loves doing that. And so it's fun to follow her. It's fun to interact with her, and she does interact with you. So I hope you enjoyed this interview. We talk the first half, well, not half. It's probably like the first 3/4 or 2/3. We talk about Sanditon, and then the back third we talk about Jane Austen, because she is an expert on all things Jane Austen, and I love that about her, because Jane Austen is my homegirl. I think make shirts that say that, don't they? I need one of those shirts. But in honor of her, I'm wearing red lipstick. So enjoy the interview, and we'll chat a bit right after. We'll see you soon. All right, so I did want to start by, we're creating a podcast room in our basement, and so we had to move this giant bookshelf that I have down there, and I didn't realize I have your Jane Austen book. And I was really excited about that. I didn't realize that you were the author of that book, but I'm a Jane Austen addict. So that was really cool.
Oh, I'm so glad you've got it.
Yeah. So the schedule that I have is the 25th of April is actually when I was going to put out your interview. Does that still work?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. That really works. Yeah.
Okay. And then we are doing, one thing that we're doing on our channel is we're doing character spotlights. And we are going to start, our very first one is going to be Jane Austen.
Okay.
Because without her, the show is nothing. So we're going to start with her. So I do have some questions about her, but I'll just include that in the 25th podcast.
Sure.
So you were the literary supervisor on Sanditon, right?
Right.
Can you tell us what that entails?
Oh, sure. So basically what happened was that Red Planet called me and said that they needed a literary consultant because they were very aware of just how loved Jane Austen is and how obsessed the fans are. And they were really keen to get it right. Now, they already had an historical consultant, Hannah, who's fantastic. And I was just like initially said, well, how's that going to work? I don't want to tread on Hannah's toes. And they said, oh, no, that's absolutely fine. That her job is different to mine. You know, my job was really to see and read the script from the Jane Austen perspective, so almost from the scholarly, literary point of view and perspective, and just sort of see those moments where things may not sound right or perhaps wasn't right in the tone or the spirit. So basically how that worked was they would send the script after it was written, and then I would read the script and make my changes, and then so it would just go back and forth until we got to where we thought was a good place.
Okay. Awesome. That had to be really fun to do that.
It was amazing. Yeah, I love it. It was great to see, you know, where I knew where it was going and nobody else did.
It's true. Yeah. So what drew you to this project? I know Red Planet called you, but what made you decide to go with this project? What drew you to it?
Well, I've always loved Sanditon, and I think it's a really interesting work of Jane Austen. And I think that although I come from a slightly scholarly background, I'm also very open to interpretation. Mm-hmm. I'm not a purist in any sense. And it always felt to me that when Jane Austen was writing Sanditon, she was going in a very different direction to all the other novels. A lot of people have this idea that, Persuasion's her autumnal novel. It's her swan song. She knew she was dying. It's so beautiful. It's grave. It's rubbish, because no sooner had she finished that, she was like, hey, I'm going to write this crazy novel called Sanditon, and it's going to be so different. And so I always had a feeling it was more like an early Victorian novel than a late Georgian, because she's moving into that new century. And I think the novel reflects that. So I've loved that fragment. So it was a no-brainer for me, you know, when they said, do you want to be involved? I was like, absolutely. because I love Sanditon, the manuscript.
Okay. So that was my next question. I was going to ask if you had read it prior to filming it. So you obviously did. Was there anything in there that you didn't feel? I know she only wrote, what was it, 12 chapters? 11 or 12. Was there anything in it that you felt wouldn't translate to screen well, or something that you thought should be taken out to do a film adaptation of it?
Not really. I mean, I thought they did a fantastic job. I mean, and I understood that, you know, so for instance, that two sisters were combined into one sister. And I felt a little bit sad about that, because I thought the two sisters were the neurotic sort of new age. They drink herbal tea. They're into green tea. I thought it was the shame that they were conflated into one sister, but I sort of see that is something you have to do when you're working on a project like this. But I think that was my only quibble or caveat. But I always felt that, you know, Sanditon was a character, as in the beach is a character itself. And what I particularly love about the program is it makes Sanditon into a character. You know, that's really important. The beach, the sea, the sky. Sanditon is a character. And so I felt that right from the start, this is going to be great. Like, I can see they're going to stick to what they can stick to, but they're going to take things off in incredibly interesting directions. And we don't know what Jane Austen would have done with that either. So what an opportunity for writers to say, let's take this character, let's take Miss Lamb. What do we do with Miss Lamb? And I'd love to know what Jane Austen would have done with Miss Lamb. So right from the start, I was like, this is going to be really interesting. And I didn't think, oh, that's a really bad choice.
Well, what was the most challenging thing about doing this, especially because it is an unfinished work and you want to stay true to Austen, but someone else was finishing the work for her? What was the most challenging thing about it?
Well, you see, and the lovely thing for me is I didn't really do anything that, you know, because that was the writer's pressure, and that all I had to do was just to, I say, read the scripts. And I mean, right from the start, actually, this was Andrew Davis's first script, and he had the women and the men swimming together. And I literally threw a hissy fit and said, it just wouldn't happen. It was different times of day and different ends of the beach. And I felt that was a protocol that they were pushing too far for Jane Austen fans. And I said to them, be really careful I said, look, you can do what you like with this, like, you know, within reason. But you're going to alienate so many people if you do something that's so crass and so historically inaccurate. You're going to lose people from the start. Now, I said, that's your choice. Like, go in with your eyes wide open on that. If I were you, I would have the men at one end of the beach and the women on the other end, and the men always swim naked. The women don't. I think even the first script, the women were naked, and I was like, no.
Oh.
That I can't remember, but I think. Anyway, the lovely thing was they did make those changes. And then there were other moments that, you know, Charlotte would say something that was so modern and it was like cringe. Like, you know, there was a couple of cringe moments when she was like, oh, I don't know which dress to wear. And I was like, oh, I don't know which dress to take with me. And I had real issues with that. I was like, she wouldn't say that. And then also there was only ever one traveling dress for women like her. So it's quite fun, like, you know, to have those little changes. And then I would say most of the time they did employ all my changes. But I didn't have control over plot points or characterization. I can't say too much, but that might change.
That's good news though, right? That might change a little bit more. That's exciting.
That's exciting.
So
if if it ever happened that we got a second series.
We are all desperately holding out hope for that. I'm just going to pretend for the sake of this that it is happening because that's what I want really, really badly. So that was actually my next question was because I saw the tweet that you had put out where you had said that you fought for them to be swimming separately, but you also fought for them to swim naked. So you can all thank me. And so I was going to bring that up. My next question of is there anything you fought for or adamant about that they kept, or the opposite that you felt that should be in there that they didn't add in there?
So it really was just like, well, the naked thing is really funny because everybody wanted the sort of wet shirt moment because of, but I was like, but actually you can go one further because men did always swim naked. Yeah. And that was a challenge because there are some people who love Jane Austen who I think would find that a step too far, that wouldn't like that and say Jane Austen would never do that. But there's no question to me that she would. I mean, she was setting a novel in a seaside resort like she had done in Persuasion with Lyme Regis, and sea bathing in the years between writing Persuasion and Sanditon. Sea bathing was becoming more and more and more popular. Why? Well, because of transport, you could get to the seaside better because the roads were better. So it's coinciding with the start of the Industrial Revolution and better roads, and you've got better stagecoaches. So with better roads, you instead of going to the spa towns like in Bath, you can go to the seaside. So the seaside is just taking. So Jane Austen's right on the cusp here. She is really, really being very trendy in saying, where are people spending their leisure time? Where are young men meeting young women? We're going to move from the spa town, a little bit old-fashioned now, and hey, look at the seaside, and this, we can go to the seaside. So she's being very trendy, and there's no question she knows that men would have swum naked, and she was a realist, and she was very keen always to get her details right. So the men would have swum naked. So like I just said that it's a sort of funny thing, and then about sort of a gazillion people tweeted.
I did get a good laugh out of that one. And I know that
there was nothing else really that I objected to, there was nothing else that I felt, because I just liked the way the scripts were progressing.
Yeah. And it felt true to form when you're reading it. It was hard to, you would know if you read the first 12 chapters, what was Jane Austen and what was not, but the way it was written, it felt very authentic to who she was as a writer. And the swimming naked thing, I think that it's not a vulgar thing. It's just, that's how it was then. It's not a sexual aspect of the show, even though women can now see naked butts when they couldn't before, but it wasn't a vulgar thing. So you'd said that they sent you the scripts. Were you able to get to set at all and see it all come together?
Oh yeah, I mean they were really fantastic. The team all the time, they were like, whenever you want to come on set, and the set designers are really keen to meet you. And so I went with Hannah, and we went for the day to Bottleneck Studios, and it was incredible. We saw, the street, which was just fantastic, with the sort of the beautiful Georgian buildings at one end, and then the sort of slightly more labouring classes at the bottom. And then we went in the warehouse. They were actually filming Lady Denham's sort of deathbed scene.
Oh, okay.
Which was exciting. So we had to all whisper and as they were doing that. And then they showed me the room where Tom Parker's got his building of Sanditon. And it was just fantastic because, you can see the room, but the cameras are all there. I mean, I think in some ways it kind of does spoil it a bit, because when I was watching it, I was like, oh, I remember that camera being there. And I remember that being, and it was freezing because the warehouse was absolutely freezing, and all the clothes were hung around on hangers. But it was so exciting, and I felt there was a really fantastic atmosphere, because you've got to remember as well, Maureen, like it's a very young cast. When I went into the writer's room, they had photographs of all the actors on the wall, and I just was, oh my God, there's so many beautiful people in this room. These beautiful young people, but all dressed in modern day clothes. Yeah, and then it would say like Tom Parker, and Lady Susan, and it was just brilliant to see that. And you suddenly think, gosh, it's such a young cast, and there were lots of children. running around on the day I was there. So it was really lovely. It was just really nice to sort of see it all. And I felt there was such a wonderful energy about it. And I think that was because it was full of such young people. So it was I had a fantastic day.
So were you there the one time?
So I just went there for the one time. They said come back anytime, but it was like, it was just difficult for me to get down because it was quite a drive, and so I only went down the one time. But they were like they were so welcoming, and they said come back. And the book you were talking about that you found on your shelf, the set designer, that was like his favorite book, and he was like, oh my God, can you sign my book? Can you sign my book? Can you sign my book? He was like so excited. He was like, gosh, I can't believe I'm meeting you. And do you like this? And do you like that? And I was like, no, it's all fantastic. And so, but they were just a great team. Couldn't be better.
That's awesome to hear. Did you have a favorite spot while you were there on set? One thing that you really kind of thought, oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's beautiful.
I think just that main street, because it's so fantastic and it was all, obviously it was an outdoor set, and they actually said to me, this is going to burn down, because I hadn't read that script then. I was kind of episode 5, I think, and so they took me down the street, and it just looked like sort of a Hollywood, studio, because it was a bright day, and all the workers were there, and it was absolutely so atmospheric. And they were like, oh, that's going to burn down. I was like, you can't do that, you can't burn that down, that's just so, you can't, that's just too much. And they were like, oh yeah, you haven't got that script yet. So I was like, okay. So that was for me, it was like the main street. It was just so fantastic.
And that was pretty authentic to the time, right? That with like the newspaper on the walls, that was something they did.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would have liked more like print. There were a lot of print shop windows were like sort of modern day televisions. There were panes of glass in a print shop, and then there would be these caricatures that you could buy for like $1, and some of them were quite saucy, and they'd be like mocking the royal family, and people would buy them.
Oh wow.
Or they would be, pictures of a famous actress, and they were almost like looking at sort of a TV gallery or a Zoom. So I think they could have done a bit more of the print shop window. Yes, I'm thinking about that now. But all of that was really, it was really authentic. It looked fantastic. You had the big Georgian windows, and no, it was just so magical, and the costumes were gorgeous. Like the clothes were just fantastic, and you sort of think, gosh, it's a big thing. And we all had lunch, and we went to the van. You're having to feed all these people, you're having to feed the children, you just think the whole thing takes so much time and effort and money, and it's quite
so many different wheels turning at the same time.
Definitely.
For sure. Did you have a favorite character in the series, even from the books, if it's separate or whatever?
I do really love Georgiana Lamb. I think she is just so fascinating. And I loved Esther. I think she's just such an interesting character. She is my favorite. She's so strong, and she's so badly done to by her brother. And I thought she was a wonderful actor. I thought she was just brilliant. But I as a character, I love Georgiana because I think she is so interesting. I mean, in the original Sanditon, she's mixed race, which I think is interesting, but also that she's an heiress and she has status. I think is really Jane Austen again, being right there on the cost, really on it, on how we view people of color from that age. So I was always interested in her story. I was like, where's she going to go? And I really love Lady Susan because I love Lady Susan because she supports Charlotte. And I think Jane Austen wrote about older women who do support younger women, and older women who don't support younger women. And she's very clear about where she stands in how you support and how you bully. So, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, she does bully Elizabeth, and Elizabeth stands up to her. And she's got power, Lady Catherine, but she abuses her power. So I just thought it was wonderful to see a woman who did not abuse her wealth and her status, and and was really supportive of Charlotte. I really liked that storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And she even, Lady Susan, one thing that really intrigued me about her was she hid her identity when she first met Charlotte. It wasn't like she wanted to throw her power and her title right out there right away. She wanted Charlotte to really know who she was, and vice versa. And I thought that was a really interesting twist on that, for a
Yeah,
person of that
definitely. To
status.
sort of be friends first, and then the status thing comes in later. So I really liked the depiction of that because, as I say, Jane Austen is writing about female experience, and
Mm-hmm.
that at the heart of all her novels is, I think, more than romance. She's writing about female experience, what it is like to be a young woman in those times, and what are the choices and what are the pressures and all of those things. And I think that relationship showed something that was very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and along the same lines, did you feel a personal connection with any of the characters? Did putting a face to them in real life add to that at all?
I definitely thought the Tom Parker, I think he's a marvelous actor, Chris.
Absolutely.
And when I first saw it, because I said who's going to play Tom Parker because he's so important, and they told me, and I was like, oh, and I kind of thought at the time, oh, he's quite young for the role, but he was absolutely perfect, and to me, he enhanced the role.
Mm-hmm.
He brought so much humor, so much pathos. He did such a fantastic job, and I didn't necessarily see it at first. I've seen him in other things in British TV. I've always liked him. I thought he's fantastic. But I think he was actually perfectly cast for that part.
Absolutely. Yeah, I knew him from Love Actually, and then to see him play a completely alternate role was really fun. But we, in the group that we run on Facebook for the podcast, we are doing a rewind right now, so we're watching all the episodes through up until Sunday. And what I realized about him is that it's really easy to paint Tom Parker as a manic person all the time. He's just always ongoing. He seems very self-absorbed. But then there's one scene where he's staring at the fire before Sydney and Charlotte come in about news for the regatta, and he just looks so desperately into the fire. And that's all Chris Marshall. That's just the way he played that out. It shows you he's not actually a manic person, but it's almost like he puts it on like armor because he has to make this successful, or they're in a lot of trouble if they don't. And I thought Chris
Yeah,
Marshall played that very well.
that's such a good point. He's completely passionate about his project.
Mm-hmm.
But what I thought was really fantastic was the personal cost, to him and to his wife and to his children and then to everybody. And I think his acting reflected that brilliantly,
Mm-hmm.
that there was such a cost. And that we know men like that. We know men who have schemes. Jane Austen's brother Henry was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
And you see the women sort of rolling their eyes and going, oh goodness, what next? And oh, I know who's going to pay the price for this. And to me, that just felt so true. I just thought it was I loved her, Mrs. Parker. She was fantastic. That she loves him, but she's exasperated by him.
Yeah.
But Chris Marshall did bring depth to that because, as you said, that moment when you just suddenly think, gosh, there's such a personal cost here. And he knows it.
Mm-hmm.
He knows it. And so he's not always the optimist and always the push, push, push. He's the person who just thinks the stakes are so high that I am going to be a ruined man. And how does the man who have these schemes keep bouncing back? We know these people, we know what these, and they are often men, not always, but often. I know many who, I've got this thing and it's going to happen and I'm going to be a millionaire and I'm going to be, and you just sort of think, yeah, right. Good luck. But it makes them sort of wonderful people to be around because they're charismatic and they've got energy and their power. They've got a lot of oomph, and you're drawn to that. But it was a nuanced performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I really felt that from him. I mean, I felt it from all the cast. It's just interesting that his character has to play the most egregious and the most charismatic, and it was just nice to see that come in.
Yeah.
Now, is, as a Jane Austen aficionado, which I've officially dubbed you, how did stepping into that world, how did it impact you? Is this the first Austen project you've been a part of in this capacity?
It is actually. I mean, yes, it is. I've had some experience because I wrote a book called Belle, which was made into a movie. It was also about a mixed race girl who was raised as an aristocrat, a bit like Georgiana Lamb. And I wrote the book alongside the film, and so I'm used to sort of being around film people, and I really like being around creative people. I think, I'm a writer, and I've written many books, and it's very solitary as a profession, that you're on your own so much. What I love about my work with Belle and Sanditon, and I'm involved in another project which I can't talk about yet, is I just love the collaboration. I love the creativity, and there's something about that world. It attracts young people, and it's fantastic because they're the ones brimming with ideas. They're not set in their ways. They've got a lot to give. So the whole process to me has just been like fun, amazing, better than I could have expected. Yeah, it's just a privilege, really, an honor to be involved. But it's my first, my first Jane Austen project, and it was just the best fun, particularly because it was Sanditon, which could go any way. So it was more exciting than maybe if I'd worked on Pride and Prejudice. You know where it's going to end. What can you offer, really?
Exactly. Yep. No, we talked about this a little bit before, but even in Austen's few chapters, the tone of this story, you can just tell that it's different. It's more mysterious. It's a little darker. Was there a favorite storyline? I know you said Georgiana Lamb was kind of your favorite, but is there a storyline that even that Andrew Davies had brought in that was kind of your favorite to follow with?
I think there were a couple. I mean, I did like young Stringer's story. And which was completely invented, but it's nice to see laboring classes and how they figure in that world of Jane Austen, where she doesn't really tackle that in many of the novels, except a little bit in Mansfield Park. So it was good to see what the laboring classes were like, and he's a very interesting man because he wants to be an architect, he wants to go to London, but his father wants to keep him in his place. He's somebody who has a dream. I liked that storyline a lot. I do like the storyline of Charlotte and Sydney. I think it's exactly probably not exactly, but I think it's roughly what Jane Austen would have done. They would have fallen in love, even though it starts so badly. And I love
ending though, right?
Yeah, tough ending. But the trajectory of the relationship, I thought, was really fascinating. That he almost begins, it's a bit Darcy-like, I guess, not liking Charlotte. And then it's a slow process, and it goes back and forth, and it's tested and it's tried, and then there's obstacles, and then so I really did like that story. But so there were lots of things that I really, I just thought the whole thing was just beautiful, really.
It's really hard to pick out things specifically that you like when you like so much about a project.
Exactly.
So, near everything I know from the Regency era comes from Jane Austen's stories. So I'm not a perfect source of Regency information, but were there things in this script that needed to be modernized just for the purpose of the audience?
Not really. I mean, it was more like the opposite way round. Like, it was more, if they said something that sounded too modern, I would step in and say it sounds wrong, and people wouldn't use that word, and there were a couple of things that I just had to go back and check and just see whether Jane Austen had used it, and then often you found out that she did. So you just there was a word I'd think, oh no, she couldn't have said a cannonball, or no, not a cannon, I'll shoot you, or something. And then I went back and I would look and see where the earliest usage of, and then, oh yeah, she did. But there were, so I think they were very keen to be as historically accurate as possible. And it's like, it's very difficult doing historical novels or adaptations, because if you just get the wrong word that sounds wrong, and people get very impatient very quickly. And they just, if they think, nobody would ever say that word, then and sort of they throw the book across the room, and you lose your reader, you lose your audience, you lose your viewer. So I think there's a very delicate line, and yet sometimes people said things in the Regency period that are really fresh and people use today, and you think, oh gosh, they couldn't possibly have said that, and then they did. So it's my point is, it's a balancing act. I said that my example about the dress, and she's, oh, I don't know what to wear, I don't know which one to tell. There was something I was like, oh, that sounds way too modern for my liking, and then why don't you try this, why don't you say this? And then they were like, oh, that sounds way more historically accurate. So again, it's just finding that balance, not being too purist about it. I thought what was brilliant about the whole of Sanditon was just the way that they managed that, the way they managed the freshness of it, but still with the courtesy, still using the Regency expressions, still using Regency language. I was so impressed. I thought, this is just amazing. Like, they're just getting everything right. It was just incredible, I thought. I hardly had, towards the later chapters, episodes, I very rarely had to really get my pencil out, and go, no. It seemed to almost get better, and as the writers, as particularly Justin, who I think is amazing, I think as he got into his flow, he really felt the language, really felt the authenticity of the language. So I was really impressed. There wasn't anything that went, ooh.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like those moments when you go, ooh, would they say that? You just want that authenticity and staying in the tone of Jane Austen, but you don't want it to be like a parody of Jane Austen either. It's so difficult, because if it becomes parodic, then that's a problem too.
Yeah. And I know that there's, I can't remember, I think it was the main Jane Austen group, when they had interviewed them about Sanditon, and their response was, this isn't a Jane Austen piece, so we don't have anything really to say about it. And I think that there's some in the Jane Austen camp who expected this to be canon to her specifically, 100%, just kind of regurgitated, but that would be such a missed opportunity to do that, to create something and finish something that was so beautifully begun by her. I think that would be a missed opportunity. There was in Pride and Prejudice, when Mr. Darcy drops off the letter for Elizabeth, and he says, I'm sorry, the feelings I presented to you were so disgusting. That used to bug the crap out of me. That line, I kept thinking, there's no way. Disgusting is not the word. I don't know why, but I thought there's no way she would use that word. So I pulled out my book, and it was the word that she used. But I thought it should be like grotesque or something like that. And I fought people on it. But I completely understand what you're saying.
That's interesting.
So something I really appreciate about this adaptation is the costume and the makeup. I thought they did just an amazing job with that. And we see the characters repeat, or even very similar. I don't know if they had the same dress and multiple things, but it looked like they would repeat outfits, which I think is very indicative of that time period. But the makeup too was so natural that when you did see it, because there's a lot of times, a lot of the characters you couldn't tell they had much on, if anything, but when they did, you could tell what product would have been used at that time to use it. So it wasn't like you could really tell they had a bunch of mascara on or something like that. It wasn't like that. One common complaint, however, is Charlotte's hair down. As I've kind of researched some things about the show, that is something that people frequently say, that she would have never had her hair done. That would have never been a thing. Is that something that would have been common then? And what would be the exception if it wasn't?
To be honest, I don't think it was common to have your hair down as a young lady, because you put your hair up as a sign that you're no longer a child and that you're a grown up. So that probably, for some people, would be pushing it too far. However, having said that, I was speaking to somebody who's an expert on hair, makeup, and clothes. A very interesting one called Hilary Davidson. She's a great friend of mine, and I was asking about this in relation to a woman slightly later than Sanditon, but not that much later, who always wore her hair down. And my friend said, "Oh no, that really unusual. That really, you put your hair up at 16. You signaled that you were grown up." And I showed her a portrait of this woman who had her hair down, and she was 31. And my friend was like, "Oh wow, I'm going to use that. That's so interesting. We can't always say every woman would have their hair up. We can't always say. So I like to think if she wanted to wear her hair down, she was a bit wild, that she would. I personally did not have a problem with that. Like everybody else had their hair probably as it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it made her stand out. And she is quite tempestuous and wild. And as I say, there are always anomalies. There are always these women who like the woman I was talking about, and who would not put her hair up, who did not want to be grown up. And I don't see any reason why that wasn't a problem for me, but I definitely think it would have been unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that women always did whatever other women did. It's ridiculous to think that they just followed everybody else. I mean, that's not how fashion changes or how fashion works. Fashion works by one person saying, I'm going to not wear hoops and a corset. I'm going to wear a chemise, and people say, oh, she's wearing her dressing gown, and then 20 years later, everybody, and this is the Regency dress, everybody's wearing that dress.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have a problem with that, and I definitely think there are examples of women who did wear their hair down, but I think it was symbolic for me. It was like a symbolic gesture that she had a very sort of spirited and independent streak.
Yeah. And Jane Austen was a master at writing women in that way, without making them almost vulgar. She did excellent with that. And there's also the aspect of Charlotte comes from a very tiny village where, I mean, they probably knew everyone. Everyone was probably like family to her. So it's also a different atmosphere coming from that into town. I would imagine there would be some different rules there. So Red Planet, they shared some deleted scenes with us. And first of all, we want way more of those scenes, because I did an interview with Rob Jarvis a few weeks ago, and he told me about a scene that I never saw. So I would like more of those. But what do you think was the reason for cutting? Was it timing, or was it a continuity thing? Like there was that kiss with Sydney and Charlotte in the street, and they weren't engaged. So that probably, I was guessing that might have been a reason that was cut, possibly, is that they wouldn't have kissed openly on the street at that time period. So what do you
I mean,
know?
I don't know about the cut scenes, because I haven't seen them, but I think you're completely right that I think in one of the adaptations of Persuasion, they kiss in the street, and there was a lot of criticism about Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth kissing in the street, and they said it just wouldn't be done. It may have been influenced by that. I think it would be very unusual to kiss in the streets, to kiss in public for a Jane Austen heroine. So I guess they probably thought about doing it, filmed it, and then decided it may be pushed too far. I can't remember reading that bit in it, because there was so much to read, so I can't remember. I haven't seen it, but I will have a look at those deleted. They're always fun to see those deleted scenes.
Yes.
But I think your instinct is right that probably, or they just wanted to save the kiss for a better time and a better location. And so I guess I think you're right about that. But I think also you always have to cut scenes, and you always, you have to film everything so that you've got it. So like on the day, when you've got X amount of actors in the room, you just want to make sure you've got everything while you've got them.
Yeah.
And you don't have to recall them in the following, if you can get it all as much as you can get. So sometimes they'll just say, let's do a scene like this. Sometimes it could be quite impromptu and say, let's try this scene just so we've got it in the can. And then if we decide to use it, we've got it. But it's all of these things are going to be on the editing floor, right? Editing room floor. There's always going to be cuts. There's always going to be stuff that's lost. But so they tend to err on the side of caution, like, let's just do everything, and then we've got it. And then in the editing room, we'll narrow it down, and that's usually the process.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, we appreciated seeing the kiss afterwards, so we liked that was put out for us. So just a couple more questions on Sanditon, and then I just wanted to ask you a couple about Jane Austen after that. But obviously, we all want, and I would say need more than want, a second Sanditon. But if we were blessed with that, how would you see that playing out, or how would you want to see it played out?
I think I would want to really see where the characters' journeys are going to lead them, and like what's going to happen to Miss Lamb and Otis, and what's going to happen to Charlotte. I mean, I think, and Esther, and I just think the characters were all so interesting you just want to see where they go next. What's going to happen? Is Tom going to rebuild? Is he going to rebuild it better? Is the Prince Regent going to come and make it famous like King George III made Weymouth famous when he paid a visit? I mean, there are all these questions about how it's going to be rebuilt. And my view would be, if I were advising, I would say trains are coming. More people can come to the seaside. So more people can come for day trips. If you can get on a train and you can come back on the train, you don't have to have as much money. So you can go for the day, you're going to get day trippers, you're going to get all sorts of people gathering there that you wouldn't have had 5 years ago, 3 years ago. So all these improvements to transport are going to bring more variety of characters. So if I were advising, I'd say really think about that, really think about the changing landscape of British society in these times when the railways are on their way. And when travel agents start, Thomas Cook starts, he starts thinking, well, people who live in slums can go to the seaside. Let's give them holidays. So the whole idea of a holiday, a vacation, just wasn't really a thing. But it starts to, and certainly not for working class people.
Yeah.
With the advent of better transport, cheaper transport, trains, all of a sudden, those places become not just for posh people, So I think there's a lot of potential there then that you can really start to mix things up a bit and have some fun. That would be my view.
Okay. That I would actually really like to see that, I think. So just being a part of this project, I'm sure you got invested in the characters, invested in the relationships, invested in what's going on with them. So I have to ask, are you team Sidlot or team Stringlot, or is there a whole nother grouping that you're a part of?
I do quite like Sidlot, I have to say. I'm not, I don't want to see her with Stringer, really. I don't see that. I would like her to be with Sydney, but I personally like the ending because I felt it was quite realistic. And Jane Austen's, is a realist. And the thing is, like, you don't always get your man. You just don't, but I would love to see them reconciled, reunited. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes. I think there'd be a lot of devastated people if they did not end up together. But what I liked about that is that the thing is that James Stringer, I loved his character so much. He was one character that I don't know, he's so sweet, he's so kind, he's so good, but he didn't bring out the passion in Charlotte the way that Sydney did. It was more infatuation than love. And I think that there's a lot of people who were saying that Alison Haywood should be with Stringer, but that seems like a weird twist to me. I don't know. So just a couple questions about Jane Austen, and then I know I've taken a lot of your time, but one thing we'll be doing, I told you about the character spotlight on Jane Austen, so we just want to kind of get some information on her from you if we could. And I think that I would never forgive myself if I didn't ask you some questions about her. So can you give us sort of an overview of Miss Austen at the time she was writing Sanditon?
Well, she was very ill, and so we shouldn't be surprised that she's become obsessed by health, and hypochondria and seaside cures. And she'd been ill for a couple of years, and probably it was Addison's disease, and that same thing that JFK had, and that is a stress-related disease, and at moments of great stress, your body doesn't produce cortisone, so it doesn't calm the body down, and then you can have a stress episode. And she'd been probably ill for some time, so I don't think it's a coincidence that she starts writing about illness and about the story begins with wanting to find a doctor. I think that's really interesting, because as health becomes more important in the late 18th century, early 19th century, doctors become more revered. Doctors were not particularly revered before then, but midwives delivered babies. People got ill and people died, and it's kind of the time when health becomes really important. Improvements to health, doctors they have more social status, and they become characters. and they become characters of value. It's no longer the aristocrat who owns the big house that's important. It might be the doctor who saves your life is more important than that. As it becomes more of a meritocracy, then self-made men, doctors, to some extent, men in the Navy, they're the rising heroes. And Jane Austen, as always, is on top of that. She's always on the cusp of these changes. But I always think it's very poignant because I don't think she particularly knew she was dying, but she was. And she was probably in great pain. She'd been and had various cures at the spa towns, and she'd feel better, then she'd feel ill again, and she'd feel better. And obviously, in those circumstances, to still write such an amazing fragment of a book is extraordinary. But it's also very interesting that she's interested in hypochondria, that her mother was supposed to be a hypochondriac. And there's a story about Jane Austen was that when she had a very bad attack, and she just lay on 3 hard chairs that were placed together because her mother wouldn't yield the sofa. Her mother lived until her 80s. And I just feel it's so poignant that Jane Austen was on these hard, uncomfortable chairs, and she was the one dying, and the mother was sort of, oh, I've got the vapors. And there's some evidence that her mother was a bit of a hypochondriac. And so it's very interesting to me that Jane Austen is looking at hypochondria, and I'll also looking at sort of what does drinking green tea. If you look at the fragment in the Parker sisters' living room, there's concoctions all along the mantelpiece. There's all sorts of newfangled. It's so interesting, and they've got all these lotions and potions. And I think, look at our environment now. We take anything, don't we? We're like, oh, I'll have a bit of that. I'll have a bit of potion. I'll have a bit of vitamin C, or I'll have a little bit. And she's exploring this in the hypochondriaism of the Parker family, in the midst of herself being in terrible pain and dying. And I think that's so poignant. She's 41. All of her family lived to great ages. It's so tragic that she, the most talented, died when everyone else was blessed with longevity. So she wasn't in a great place. She could still joke, and her sense of humor remains intact. But it's clear that matters of health are at the front of her mind. And that's reflected, I think, in Sanditon.
Absolutely. What do you think she would have ended Sanditon the way it ended? Do you think she would have fallen into a specific camp of who Charlotte should be with, or do you think she would have ended it where she didn't get her man?
Probably she'd have given Charlotte her man. I think the interesting thing again is because she's writing at such an interesting time, 1816, that she's the world of the novel is changing a lot at that time. Novels are really changing, and so she might not have gone that way. We just don't know. So the original title for Santa was The Brothers. And I think that's really interesting that she saw this as a story between brothers. And so where was she going to take the brothers? Like, they're the focus. So we just can't know. But what we can know is it could have gone anywhere, because it's not a Georgian novel as such. It feels like an early Victorian novel, and that is a shift. That's a change in her world, and that's reflected in so much of that fragment, because you just think right from the start there's a freshness about this. There's such a freshness in the writing, and there's such a difference in the society's not so stratified. It's looser. People are going up and down, and you're just getting a sense that it honestly could have gone anywhere, just because of the time that she's writing. And other novels written at the same time are doing different things. They're not just boy meets girl, boy and girl have obstacles, boy and girl reunite. It's starting to change.
Yeah. And I think that's something I like about her work, is that although it's largely about a relationship between a man and woman, she writes about so many other things in her work that it's not solely just about them. And I appreciate that about her work. Do you think Sidney was a Darcy to an Elizabeth? Or do you think it was something? I personally think he's not so. I think he's got traits of Darcy, but there's so many people who, as I was doing research on this, were saying that he's Darcy to Elizabeth, but I don't think it's that exact. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's what she kind of
I definitely think there's something of Darcy in them not liking each other initially, and that great old trope of I can't stand you, and then falling in love. It's such a brilliant trope. And I definitely think in the fragment, Jane Austen was going with that similar territory. Having said that, Jane Austen often doesn't really repeat that kind of trope. Like, she does something, she always is changing up and always doing something different with her heroines and her heroes. So who knows? But for me, there are definite elements of Darcy, except he doesn't have the arrogance of money. Darcy has the arrogance that money brings.
Yeah.
And I think he's more of a snob, Darcy, and I don't think Sidney's a snob as such. I think he's strong. He has a strong character. He's opinionated. He loves his brothers. He defends his brothers. He has a sense of honor, but I don't think he's a snob in the way that Darcy's a snob. And again, that makes him more of a new kind of hero, which is more of a sort of self-made man. I also think the ward thing is very interesting, because in the 18th century, 19th century, if a man had a ward, it usually meant his illegitimate child.
Oh. Huh.
So I kind of wondered why they didn't play with that a bit more, because and how fascinating that he has a mixed race child, if that is his child. Because that was not uncommon, that you would say, this is my ward, and everyone would go, oh yeah, we know what that means. You're going to pay for her education, you're going to excuse me, look after her, she's your child, but you're not going to acknowledge it as your child. So maybe he's got a past as well, that could have been explored, or maybe that Jane Austen was going to explore. I think that would have been, if I was writing the stories or advising, I would have said, you should have made more of that, because that's really interesting. So I think for me, yeah, he's less of a snob than Darcy. This element, like you, I can see the traits, I can see the elements, I can see that it makes for a great love story when you don't like someone initially. And then also that person changes you, like when Sidney says, I'm most myself when I'm with you, which is very powerful. But he's also willing to sacrifice what he wants for the good of his family. He's a very noble figure, and in that sense, he is a noble Jane Austen figure.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. I agree with that completely. So she usually, Jane Austen, I can see her in like Elizabeth Bennet. There's a little bit of Jane Austen, Elizabeth Bennet. I feel like she always puts a little bit of herself into some of the characters, into the pieces that she writes. How much of herself was put into this story, do you think? And which character do you think she's most like?
I don't know whether she really does in this one. And I think it's because she was so ill. I think it was different, that I sort of agree with you that there is probably a little bit of her in every one of her characters. I get that. This one, I'm not so sure. I think she felt so removed from that point, and it was very clear by then she was not going to find love and find romance and find, she'd probably accepted that she wasn't going to get her happy ending. And maybe that's one of the reasons I feel more of a distancing between her and Charlotte or the other characters. I mean, Clara goes off in a very different way to how the fragment is. I feel like she has some sympathy for Clara. Yeah. So, but we don't know what she would have done with Clara. But I think she probably relates more to a feisty character, an independent, feisty, funny character, because we know that she was those things.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So probably Charlotte, probably.
Okay. And the last question I have is there any piece or tidbit you can tell us about Jane that might be interesting to Sanditon fans that they maybe didn't realize about her or this story?
Do you mean in relation to Sanditon or generally?
Generally, or in relation to it, just something that would be interesting about Jane.
she really, really loved the sea. So I write about this in my book, A Life of Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things, that she loved the seaside. My theory that the only portrait we know that is definitely Jane Austen is one when her sister Cassandra painted with her back to us.
Mm-hmm.
And people have always said it's in the countryside, but I'm absolutely convinced it's by the sea. And it's partly because the ribbons on her bonnet are floating in a way that a sea breeze. And I think she's looking down over Lyme. And I think I know the exact place where there was these sort of scrubby trees, and she's looking out over the sea. And she talks a lot in Persuasion about how the sea makes you contemplate. When you see the waves going back and forth, you contemplate, and the sea has this mysterious, it exerts something very mysterious over us. We know that she was dipped into the sea. She was actually dipped.
Oh.
When she was unwell.
So like a healing sort of thing?
Yeah. So in freezing cold water, by the way, in 1805, when she was in Lyme, she was dipped and she'd enjoyed it and she wanted to go back in. So we can assume that she liked the sea and liked swimming. So that would be my thing that people have not realized before. And I said, look, this is really important. The sea was very, very important to Jane Austen. So, and I think that relates to Sanditon and to her.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know she loved the sea?
I knew that she lived by the seaside for a small time, didn't she?
Yeah.
I didn't know that she had loved it as much as you'd said, though. And I didn't know about the dipping in the sea either. How apt that this was her final swan song, that it's centered on the sea was the last thing she would ever come out with. That makes so much more sense now.
Oh,
that's awesome. Well,
that seems like a good place to end, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. I just thank you so much for talking with me, and I really love your work, and I love what you did, and I'm so thankful that you were talking with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and good luck with everything, and keep me posted. I'll tweet about it, obviously, when the time comes, and yeah, let's stay in touch, Maureen.
Absolutely. And about a week before, I'll send you a copy of this so you can see it before I put it out.
That's amazing. Right. Okay, all the best. Have a lovely day.
Paula. Thanks, you too.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Hey guys, I hope you had as much fun listening to that or watching it as I did talking with her. It just seemed like a very natural conversation. I think we had talked for about an hour and a half, I want to say. And so it was really fun. She was really knowledgeable. She had a lot of things to say, a lot of interesting things. And I hope that you guys got a lot out of it, as I do with every episode. Maybe I should stop saying I hope you get a lot out of it and just start assuming that you're getting things out of the episodes that we put out for you. So next week will be another character spotlight. And I'm not going to tell you who we're spotlighting, but you will hear it soon and you'll see it soon. So look forward to that. Again, if you are a fan of the show, not necessarily a fan of this podcast, although I would like that, but if you are a fan of the show Sanditon and you want to talk with us, reach out to us, please. Our email at the.sanditonchronicles@gmail.com, or you can find us on our Facebook group, the Sanditon Chronicles, Sanditon Family Fan Club, or you can find me on Twitter at Moheeto, Moheeto, and message me or on any of those platforms, and we will be happy to connect with you. Again, we have a list of subjects. We have it all scheduled out for the next year, actually. So you would just be able to choose from any of the ones that we have scheduled. And really, honestly, we just try to make it like a conversation between two people talking about the show that we all love. So if you are interested in that, I encourage you to reach out to us. We have so many spots left to fill. Like I said, we have it scheduled out for a year. So a lot of spots to fill. If not, I'm happy to just talk at you. They might get longer and longer, but I am more than happy to do that. So I hope you guys have a great week. I hope that you watch more Sanditon. Please, please watch more Sanditon. Watch and watch and watch and watch. And watch any of the episodes that you missed. If this is your first episode of this podcast, or watching or listening to it, we welcome you. But go back and listen to our other episodes. This is episode, this is episode 6. And then we did an introduction, so that's 7. And we also have a little bonus clip on Tom Parker, which is technically our 8th episode. So in addition to this one, there are 7 other videos or episodes to watch or listen to. So go back and watch those and let us hear your thoughts. We'd love to interact with you. We'd love to hear you. And let us know what you think about doing a live show. After doing some investigating on Podbean, we can do a live show where you can call in. And I'm not sure what exactly it looks like to call into the show, but you can call in and chat with us. There will be a couple of us, actually my whole team, I believe, will be on that podcast. So there's 4 of us, and I think that we will all be on there chatting. We'd love to have you come on and chat with us. And then we'll also be doing, at the same time, a YouTube Live. So that's another thing. If you are not following our YouTube channel, go and subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Sanditon Chronicles. So that's all we have for today. We really enjoyed this episode. I love the interview episodes. They're my favorites, but I love them all. I can't lie. It's my baby. I love them all. So on that note, have a great week, guys, and we will see you real soon. Bye-bye.